Of course, before starting, thanks to these companies for having paid my trip here and allowing me to be there today. So I will be talking about the guide board, which is an artifact, a tool, a physical tool that you can use to improve the effectiveness of your retrospectives and allow you to use them as tools for continuous improvement. So I guess I should start by defining what are retrospectives. Yeah, I'll do that in a short while. Let's do that now. So retrospectives are moments where the whole of your team comes together to reflect on what happened, how you worked, and define ways to do better the next time. And you should have that regularly, right? So, my name is Matti Schneider. Now I work from within the state. I modernized the French government. I had a talk on that earlier. And the work I'm about to present was done in my previous startup before I joined the French government. It was part of an experiment that lasted for 1 year and a half, about 18 months. And so I had this field for experimenting, which was the startup. And I studied it as part of social and cognitive anthropology study I was making after my engineering degree. So we were developing a web application for surgery clinics. So that's a very heavily constrained environment, right? You have regulations, you have difficulties to access that market. We also were dependent on a single investor. So we really had a lot of constraints. And we were in a team of 3 to 5 people. So it was very heavy to handle. And technically speaking, we had the kind of stuff that Dimitri talked about just before. But beyond the technical aspects of our tooling, we also had to improve very quickly to adapt to the changing conditions and to discovering new obstacles in our delivery. So we relied heavily on artifacts to handle these constraints. And there was one artifact in particular. So artifacts are just physical tools that you use, right? Your Scrum board is an artifact. Pretty much everything that gives you information about what you're doing and that's not in a human brain is an artifact. So one of these artifacts in particular helped us survive and strive in this environment by allowing very fast learning and adaptation. And I'm really going to have to switch these lights off because I don't think you're seeing anything. Could you please switch the lights off? No. Yeah. Great. Thank you. This projector isn't bright enough otherwise. So this was one of our walls. Right? The other walls were pretty much as crammed. So as you see, we have a lot of artifacts, right? I could talk about all of them. They are pretty interesting. But here we're going to focus on the guide board, which is up there. And there's very good reason for it to be up there. And I won't have time to explain it in details now. Let's just say that if you want to make a guide board, I would advise that you put it somewhere up ahead. And if we have some time for questions, then it would be a great question to ask. So after each time your team takes to reflect on that just behavior, so these retrospectives, the aim is that the team creates a guide ticket. So these are the guides for each rule that it decides to adopt to reinforce its strengths and counterbalance its weaknesses. And the guide board, thus, is a retrospective outcome artifact. If you've read Coburn, that's the way he puts it. So the idea is that here you have the index of the sprint in which you did the retrospective, and each of the green tickets here, these are guides. So we've discussed during the retrospective guides. Yeah, guides. The guide board. So these are guides. The idea is that once you've discussed during the retrospective, basically either you've said stuff that's very, let's say, emotional, or it's only about people discussing. And it's very important. It's very good. Right? It's important that they discuss about what just happened. But sometimes you don't have anything to say, right? It just happened. Yeah, I wasn't satisfied. Now let's do something else. Then there are some kinds of actions that are very punctual. So it says, for example, for the next iteration, I suggest that we stop working on that bit and work on that other bit. And this will influence the next planning phase, right? And then there are some other outputs which are more cultural, which are things that should influence the way your team behaves over time for all the foreseeable future, actually. You say, well, it's now been the third time we aren't able to, for example, here on sprint 2, we decided we shouldn't have tasks that are valued more than 10 story points in our backlog. Why? Because we failed utterly at trying to deliver tasks that were that big. So we decided that now we should never have tasks that big in our backlog. And at the moment we're creating the rule, it should be forever. So that's a guide. And of course, the first guides are pretty trivial, right? Saying that you shouldn't have huge tasks, that's pretty simple. Or saying at what time the stand-up should happen, or at which time we should be eating at noon. Well, this is trivial, but at the very beginning of your team creation, that's the thing you're actually struggling with, right? It's about avoiding spending half an hour like, who's going to start this stand-up? Am I going to stand up? And you waste 20 minutes. So at the end of the first retrospective, we just realized that it was stupid to wait for each other. So we decided we would have that time. Culture is mostly emergent. External constraints and internal constraints can change that culture. Which means that guides are not forever. Sometimes you define a rule that should be for all the foreseeable future, and after 3 months, you realize it doesn't make sense anymore. Perhaps you find some better way. Perhaps the constraint that made that rule emerge isn't there anymore. So in such occasions, we close the guides. So these are closed guides. We just put another note on it, and we write the index of the iteration at which we closed it. So here, for example, at sprint 34, so that was about 1 year in, we decided our iterations shouldn't be 2 weeks long anymore, but 1 week long. Because we actually had so much improved in our delivery capabilities that it made sense to be shorter, to adapt more rapidly. Sorry? More like that. Yeah. So we don't remove the sticky, right? We don't remove the guide. We just close it. Why? Because then you can reflect on why at some point you wanted to do that. Because one thing that you realize happens quite often is you have the retrospective and you say, hey, perhaps we should do that. And then someone in your team says, but I'm pretty sure we tried it 4 months ago and it didn't work out, but now I can't remember why it didn't work out. And so by keeping the guide there and just closing it, people keep a memory of what happened, what they tried, why they wanted to close it. And actually you can make it even easier by writing down a few keywords on the opposite side of the closure ticket. So how do we close precisely? We don't just say, okay, now this is over. The process is very simple. When you're doing a retrospective, you take a quick look at the guide board and you try and evaluate whether you're following these practices. If you had a hard time during this iteration to follow one of the guides your team edicted, you just put it downwards. There's a special row at the bottom of the guide board which says, warning, we had a hard time following this rule. So this has two effects. The first is that for the coming iteration, it is now very put forward. So your team will have its attention drawn to it and will usually adjust its behavior and do its best to follow the rule. If at the end of that iteration where the ticket was under observation, you've still not been able to follow the guide, then the guide is over. And there's no negotiation. It's not about, yes, but we really want to follow this practice. The guide board is about showing what your team is doing. It's not simply goals that you want to achieve. It's we want to do that. And either you're actually doing it, right? Over time it has been infused in your culture, and then the guide board is simply stating what you're doing, or you're not able to follow these guides and they should be put forward. You have to work on them, and if you're not able to work on them, it's closed. You have to find some other way to fix your problems because this doesn't work. Yeah.
So the guide isn't about the features, the solution or product you're developing. It's about like guidelines to follow. It's not related to the features of the product you're developing.
No, it's really cultural. It's only about the culture. It's about what you want your team to be doing. You don't talk about features or anything. It's really about process and people. Okay. We'll have some other examples of what can be on the guide board, what are good guides and what are not. But,
even if the retrospectives, they discuss features or some
Yep.
improvement to their code or to
Yep.
the project, they do not include them here.
No, it's very valuable. The guide board should not be the dumping place for everything that was said in the retrospective. And you may definitely have a retrospective where there's no update to the guide board. That should ask questions on the ability of your team to reflect and improve, but it's possible. If you only have stuff that's valid for the next iteration or the next 2 iterations, don't write it here. So you may have a hard time because at the end you get quite many guides, right? Which is why we did drawings. At first we wrote things down, and if you simply write, at the end you get a wall of text, and it doesn't work. But if you do drawings, and if you actually have your team start by doing the drawings together, then they will remember the guides much more efficiently. Not only will they remember better, but it will also create a much better consensus, because the amount of information you encode and the amount of debate you create around creating a drawing is much, much higher than trying to find a few keywords that embody the rule you want to do. So each of these guides takes about 20 to 40 minutes to create. It's very simple, of course, but we have to iterate, because the first time someone tries to do a drawing, and then the other said, no, well, that's not exactly how I felt it should be. And then you have the actual conversation on what it is you want to change, because everyone agrees on what was the problem, but the actual solution you want your team to implement over time is not exactly clear for everyone. So if you do drawings, you will have good debate, and then it's very easy for you to scan and find the guides you wanted to implement in the first place, to follow. So we measured the efficiency of this artifact by the number of time a debate could be stopped in the team before it actually starts, simply by pointing to a guide. So you have your team starting to say, yeah, but I think we should be doing it this way. I think we should be doing it this way. And rather than having someone say, you know, we already had this conversation 2 months ago, you can just say, I think it was this guy. And what's pretty interesting is that since all the team agreed on this guide, there's no frustration. It's not like, shut up and follow the rule. It's, remember, we already had this conversation in depth some time ago, and we agreed we should do that. So if you encounter obstacles later on, and someone points you to the guide, then everything comes back to your memory. And you might still be frustrated, but you remember why you wanted to follow this practice. So this really fluidified our process. Actually, to put it in some other way, you might have heard the metaphor of user stories being a reminder to have a discussion. Right? You cannot capture everything in a story card. It's a reminder that you should discuss with partners. So the guide is a reminder that a discussion has been had. And you capture the same amount of information as your user story. It's much more than what's written there. Same thing there. You've embodied consensus. There's no frustration from a team member in agreeing with past himself or herself. And if there is, the guide has been closed already. And of course, over time, the guides become more specific, right? The first ones were trivial. But here, we're defining very precisely that user testing should be closed with a debrief. And debriefing has been, of course, defined during the discussion. So yeah, we are about 9 months in. So we have very, very specific things. And as you've seen here, as you can see on sprint 29, we had nothing to say. Happens. And as they become more specific, we can even reach a meta level because guides can also impact the usage of the guide board itself. Actually, this endangered row and having guides evolve, we didn't come up with it. Right. When I first created this thing, I didn't have all these magic images in my mind. We just created because after 15, 20 sprints, we realized some of the guides were outdated, but simply removing them, we lost information. So we created these rules. So guides, we can really change pretty much anything in your process. And other teams, so I started talking about this, and actually other teams already used similar artifacts. Here it's another one, and they print their guides that they call improvements axes on A4 paper, and they stick it around and that's pretty fun because they don't do their drawings themselves, but they used comics. That pretty much everyone in the team liked, and they took pictures from these comics. So it really feels like there's something with encoding information through graphics to help you remember things over a long period of time. So the guide board is mainly the idea of identifying a subset of your retrospective outcomes, the ones that should be there for the foreseeable future, and a few constraints on representation. And that's pretty much all there is to it. But you have to have good retrospectives, of course. If you don't, then what you're capturing is not useful to your team. And lastly, there's one extremely important condition, is that the team has to own the artifact. This is not a driving wheel for some manager to add rules. I mean, you can do it, but if you do it, it simply won't work. And it's a bit of a waste, really. It only works because you've created consensus and everyone agrees that it is their opinion voiced up there and reified. Thanks for your attention. So we have some time for questions, I guess? Yeah. Excuse me, I didn't hear. Oh, okay. Oh, please don't. How can I make a short answer? So I've actually written a thesis on that, on why you should use paper. And the short version is there will be a mismatch between the ability to update, between the friction you will have to update your artifact and the friction it embodies in your process. And that's the very same reason why I said you should put it up there. Because how long does it take for you to change, to change your process, really, to change your team's mind. How long does it take? It takes 2-3 iterations, right? If you're lucky, if everyone agrees. It's at least 1 month. So you want it to be pretty long and annoying to add rules or to update rules. You don't want someone to just be able to open some web page on his laptop and say, now, no, I think this should be closed, or we should really rephrase this. You want that person to have to remove his shoes, to have to remove things away from the desk, and to have to climb up there and just take that sticky note and put it down there. You want everyone to be able to understand what's going on. You need this to take at least half an hour just for updating, right? Because otherwise you feel like you have control over your process, which you don't have. And that's for the very same reason why I think, I call this friction isomorphism. I think that's the same reason why you shouldn't use Scrum boards, digital Scrum boards, or rather Kanban boards, because they make it too easy to add columns in your process. And adding columns in your Kanban board means adding steps in your process. And adding steps in your process is a very complicated thing. So if most of the digital tools will make it easier for you to add columns, then they will make it to just pass one card from doing to done, which is plain stupid, because your process is all about optimizing passing things from doing to done. And the reality is that it will be very hard to change your process. So you want this to be, yes, isomorphic. It should be as hard to do something in real life than it should be, proportionally speaking, to your model. Yeah.
If you go back to the slide where you decided to go on 2 weeks.
I'm sorry. Yeah, which one?
It's
The larger version, right?
It's written, so I guess it's on the second week.
Yeah.
On the second sprint.
Yeah.
You decided, so you stopped 2 weeks iterations on week
No.
sprint 34.
Yeah.
That's the reading. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not that you decided to stop 2 weeks iterations.
No.
On sprint.
Blue tickets are closure tickets. Yeah. Yeah. So on sprint 2, we decided our iterations should be 2 weeks because we hadn't decided earlier on. Then we closed them. Yeah.
This goes for one team.
Yeah.
Is it beneficial to take the guides that are sticking through the whole sprints and make that to more teams?
No, I don't think so. But then again, I mean, I can't tell you I've tried it, but I tell you I wouldn't try it.
Share that this guide has been
Yeah. But remember, once again, I mean, this sticky note here, it's like, it's not even the tip of the iceberg. It's just a reification of a shared experience of facing obstacles, and then a discussion on how are we going to go over this obstacle. And it's all about our strengths and weaknesses as a team. And perhaps this other team, faced with the very same obstacles, will have a very different reaction. And you don't want them to do the same thing. I mean, why was it good for us to have 2 weeks iterations and then 8 months later to want to have 1 week's iterations? There's nothing intrinsic to that. So you can just move them. So I think what's interesting is that since they are visible, you can maybe have other teams come in and have a discussion, because maybe it can give them ideas. But no, you can't just, because this is deeply human. This is just a small visualization of what humans are doing. And a set of humans, another set of humans, try to put the same rules, doesn't work. Yeah.
These are the actions of your retrospective. These are you do the retrospective, then each sprint.
Yeah.
You take your action right here, or is it different?
No, I mean, so it's all a matter, I'm dividing actions between different subsets, right? There are some actions that are very punctual.
Yes.
Then you don't put them as guides.
Yes, you just take the general guides. Like.
Well, I think the question is simply, do I see myself doing this for until the end of this project, right? So of course you shouldn't be doing projects, you should be doing products if you're doing Agile. I mean, do I see myself doing this in 2 years? And if the answer is yes, because right now you believe that's the best way to do, then it's a guide. If you say, maybe we should try that and we'll see in the next iteration, it's not a guide, it's an experiment. And perhaps at the end of the next iteration or the one after, it will be a guide. But at the moment, it's an experiment. You cannot say, I'm going to follow this, which is why we write down the iteration number on the closure ticket. Because you don't want to have guides that are closed the iteration after they were rejected or the iteration after. If you're doing that, it means you don't have a clue what you're doing. You're saying, we should do this. And then 2 weeks later, no, we shouldn't do it. So it doesn't work. That's why it's interesting to have these numbers. They give you two things. First of all, they are a very good reminder for your team to remember why they decided to stop this. Because, for example, even now, 2 years later, I remember, for example, here we closed 2 tickets on sprint 15. And sprint 15 was when one of the employees left. And so it didn't make sense anymore to have these guides because they deeply relied on this person to be here. See, so for me, this 15 thing means a lot. For you, it means nothing. But just saying 15 reminds me why we decided to stop that. And if two months later we decide, hey, perhaps we should do something a bit like that, and I can remember why we stopped doing it. Yeah.
Should all the team agree on one guide, or it's just a discussion that you can keep on going until they all agree on a guide?
No, if it's a guide, it's a consensus. You've all agreed to something. And sometimes it's true, you will have discussion, but it's not settled yet. If it's not settled yet, then your team is not ready to follow it as a guide. Maybe some of them will try, then it's an experiment. Some of them will try, and then we'll discuss it again at the next retrospective. But it's not yet a guide. The guides are here because they are our common law. They are the law that we've created together. They are our emerging culture reified and made visible for everyone.
So we don't put experiments?
No, you shouldn't put experiments there. Yeah.
Find another board for this.
Yeah, but we also had an experiments board, and I recommend it. But there's stuff with Lean Canvas, with Lean Startup things. They have nice experiment canvases. It works pretty well. Then, as I said, if your experiment is validated, then indeed you can put it as a guide.
How do you, when you come into the project,
Yeah.
come in with a lot of assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to learn to be explained to them.
Yeah.
But these are just changes and new experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like start the project with a meeting to set the first guides, or how do you do those?
No. I really think that this should emerge. Of course, this is not meant to be exhaustive. This is simply the things that your team had to discuss about. This is not the full culture. So why do we show it? Because basically, either the team does things and it works out and no one has to ever talk about it. Then it's in their DNA, it's in their culture, no problem. Or they encounter issues and they agree on a way that they should do things. Then it's not the way they are doing it right now. So they make a guide to remember that they should end up being this way. And if it's still open, then at the end, indeed, it's their culture. It's done. It's integrated. If it's not integrated, then it should be in their observation or closed because it's so far away from them that they are not able to learn it.
So I understand like in Sprint 6,
Yeah.
the accumulation of all the guides that are not closed, not only
Yeah.
what's in line 6.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not rules that you should follow on sprint 1. It's rules that were created on sprint 1. Rules that were created on, and of course they keep on applying. And I mean, here you see that it's our leftmost part of the board, and many tickets are closed because 1 year later, many of them didn't make sense anymore. Yeah. And if you wonder this thing here, was a hard part, a hard time. And actually, you can see that on sprint 15, this guide, I think, sums it all up. We really messed up here.
Maybe you stop Scrum.
No, it really meant, come on guys, we wanted to do Scrum, but clearly we've not been able to follow it. So yeah, and we actually stopped it on sprint 34. Same time we decided to stop 2 weeks iterations because we were in continuous deployment. Actually, we had been in continuously deploying for some time, but then we realized it really didn't make sense anymore to have these planning sessions. We were much more efficient with a flow-based infrastructure. Yeah, we actually switched to Kanban. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were doing Scrumban almost from the start, but then at some point we realized that, yeah, okay, retrospective is very important for us. We keep these iteration things, but delivery, planning, demo doesn't make sense over 2 weeks iterations. We are more able to work with business and with our partners on a flow-based basis. Yeah. Okay. So thanks for your attention. And if you're interested, yeah, there's a full paper on that, actually, there. And if you can read French, there's this whole thing about friction isomorphism and stuff. So.